Years ago this very day we went to Governor's Isle for to stand for instant cannon in true military style. 17 American dollars each month we surely get for to carry a gun and baguettes with a military step.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Frying Pans West. Tonight we're going to have a show on Mormon foods, a little bit of discussion on the historical aspects of the Mormon immigration west. Back in 1830, when the first beginnings of Mormonism came about, Joseph Smith gathered his followers and they moved west. They were persecuted and harassed in various communities, and they moved on through to Ohio from New England and then into Illinois and Missouri and eventually then to Salt Lake. They went back into the wilderness looking for Zion. And this was a really great movement toward a country of their own. In those days, there was a lot of feeling about starting one's own country. Aaron Burr and his group had contemplated making a country around the Mississippi River Valley, and there were great feelings of secession and the spirit of forming a new country. Well, the Mormons did just that. They felt that they had been pushed and harassed, and they would go where nobody could bother them, and they were looking for Zion, and this they found in Salt Lake. And indeed, through the great Mormon effort and the heroism of the original pioneers, they were able to break the land out there, the arid, dry Salt Lake Valley, and make a fertile, wonderful paradise. The fruits that are grown in the area around Brigham City and down to Salt Lake are out of this world, just beautiful things. Cherries, Bing cherries are marvelous, and the strawberries are great. Well, the Mormons in the very beginnings, however, went through a great deal of trial in order to make their westward move. The food situation was a very critical one. The beginnings of the first movements, they didn't have enough supplies to take with them. They didn't have enough horses or wagons to bring them west, and so they went to a handcart situation following a drought and grasshopper plagues in 1855, up to 1855. Then Brigham Young, who was then the leader, Joseph Smith having been murdered earlier, Brigham Young then suggested that they use hand carts to bring the people across the plains. Now, the Mormon religion was essentially, and still is essentially, a missionary religion. They sent out missionaries to England, Scotland, Ireland, the Scandinavian countries, throughout Europe, and especially Switzerland. And Mormons came from all over that northern European area. They were brought by boat to the East Coast and then by rail to Iowa, and then they took hand carts and they walked every foot of the way, pulling a hand cart. It's like a little peddler's push cart. It was a two-wheeled cart that was just built enough, big enough that a person could carry basic possessions and basic foods and then get all the way to Salt Lake. Well, in 1856, at the time of the first company of Mormons that went across, they called themselves Saints, they started too late in the season, and they were hit by early snows, and the people were just decimated by the weather conditions. And in the book called Handcarts to Zion by Dr. Hafen, and this is a very famous historian who teaches at BYU in Utah. Dr. Hafen describes the perils that these people went through, the trials and the problems with food. And I picked up some of this from his book. One traveler wrote, for example, "Hitherto, although a ration of a pound of flour had been served out daily to each person, it was found insufficient to satisfy the cravings of hunger. Shortly after leaving Fort Laramie, it became necessary to shorten our rations so that they might hold out and that the company not be reduced to starvation. First, the pound of flour was reduced to 3/4, then to a ½ pound, and afterwards to still less per day. However, we pushed ahead. And they, of course, ran out of food totally as they went across. One group was reduced to eating rawhide, and they gave the recipe. There was a man by the name of Jones who was a professional cook with them, and he devised a plan to make rawhide palatable, and here's his recipe. Scorch and scrape the hair off. This has a tendency to kill and purify the bad taste that scalding gave it. After scraping, boil 1 hour, throwing the water away that had extracted all the glue. Then wash and let it get cold. Then eat with a little sugar sprinkled on it. Not terribly palatable sounding dish. Well, the Mormons used to adapt things that they could find there for their various foods. For example, they didn't know where this sugar came from, but they found on the leaves of some trees little pieces of crusted crystalline substance, and they tasted this, and it was quite sweet. And so this became known as Mormon sugar. They thought it was manna from heaven. They didn't know where on earth this sugar came from that appeared on the leaves of the trees, and it's only been in recent years that they have found that this actually was the droppings of aphids in the tree leaves up above, and the droppings would drop down and encrust on the leaves and was a very sweet substance. Another thing that they did in the early days was to take pumpkins in the fall. After the pumpkins were grown, they would hollow these out and then leave them overnight when it would freeze, leave them outside in a frosty night, and sure enough, the pumpkin on the inside would begin to bleed or form a liquid, and it would fill up with this liquid, and they would drain it out and then boil it, and it would make a very sweet syrup, and they used this as a sweet syrup substitute. Another thing that the Mormons had, a story, and this was about a family that came west, and they had an old red rooster with them, and this red rooster was a family pet. And they had brought it all the way out, and when they got there, they had a bag of green peas. And this was the seed. They were dried green peas, and they were going to use these for seed. So they one day fixed their garden, and they planted the seeds, the green peas, right along in a long, long row. And after they got them all planted, they turned around, and sure enough, who was following them but the red rooster? So they saw that the rooster had picked up each of the green peas as they had buried them, and he was full of their seed. So they decided the only thing left to do was to eat the red rooster, which they did, and they recovered their seed out of him and replanted it, and they said that those green peas grew better than any that they had previously had, and it was the beginnings of green peas in Mormon country. Well, tonight we're going to do several different dishes, each one representative of a different group of the Mormons in their origin. Well, the first being red flannel hash, and this is a dish that actually came from New England, from Vermont and New Hampshire, and it was supposed to have been a favorite dish of Ethan Allen, the famous Revolutionary soldier. It's essentially a hash. It's called red flannel hash, and the recipe, incidentally, is in the cookbook that we've put out. This is called FryingPans West cookbook, and it has a section on Mormon foods, and all of the recipes, in fact, for the whole series are available in this cookbook that you can get through your station. Now, to start off with red flannel hash, the first thing to do is to get yourself about a pound of ground chuck and a big potato, and boil this potato and peel it down, and then some red beets, and you can get these cooked red beets, and an onion, and a few eggs and some butter. The first procedure is to slice down your potato into fairly thin slices. what you're trying to do is make a hash, and you can just chop these up into bits and pieces. We'll cross-cut here. They don't have to be terribly exact. This is an easy dish to make, and the addition of the beets gives it a fine color and an especially good flavor. We'll cut up the potato, and I might as well start getting the onion pan hot too. And take the beets, cut them up. I hope that you have a color television set so that you can see the contrast of that beautiful red of the beets. You mix together your beets and potatoes first. You can use a can, a regular small can of beets is plenty. And you need a broiler, an overhead broiler preferably, or if you don't have that and you want to cook this, for example, out on a picnic, well, you can just fry it in the pan until it gets crisp on its bottom. This is a very famous old early American recipe, and it was brought west by the saints as a typical thing. Now, vegetables were known in the West. All of the fur trade forts had vegetable gardens where they would get their fresh produce. The travelers, however, were limited to simply dried items, with the exception of rhubarb. And we're going to show you a rhubarb recipe in a little bit. Let's see, I'll take this in here. Now take your meat and mix your meat directly with this is a pound of ground chuck. And mix that directly with it. Let's see, I'm going to get a spoon over here. Just cut that in. Break in the pieces of the beet and the potato. And then we better start cutting some onion. I had a gentleman write a letter to me, and he said that the best way to keep your onion from hurting your eyes when you chop it up is to put a knife in your mouth. He said just hold a knife between your teeth when you do this, and I've got one here. I'll just do it and see if it works. And it probably won't. But he says if you do this, it'll keep yourself from crying when you're doing your onions. Now, I've never tried this before, but no tears yet. You know, it works. Seems ridiculous, but now we got the onion chopped up. We'll take about 2 tablespoons of butter in a pan and cook these onions until they are enough of this knife nonsense. Let's say about 2 tablespoons would be a quarter of a pound, or a quarter of a quarter here. And we'll take our onions, and saute them. When they get transparent, then it's time to move them into your meat mix. We'll just let that simmer there a little bit. Now we'll add some salt to this big fellow. And you can do this to taste, but usually you can figure approximately a good teaspoonful for this quantity. And then a little pepper. A little cayenne pepper is very good too, but black has a fine flavor. Let's see. Now, take 2 tablespoons of cream. And I put this in here a little bit earlier, and if you'll heat that slightly and put into that another about a quarter of a pound of butter. That's 2 tablespoons of butter. And melt this butter and cream together. We were fortunate here because when we got the cream, the person who got the cream bought some whipping cream, and this makes it especially nice because it gives it a good crust on the top. These are beginning to become transparent. We'll mix this up a bit more. The red of the beets gives this dish a really wonderful look. Then take yourself a casserole. See, let's see, about ready. These flat tin frying pans are very good for fast work. They're not good for long-term simmering or cooking, but they're fine for fast work like this, because it's important with onions too, if you have a good fire, to keep your fire absolutely hot. Otherwise your onions will tend to bleed instead of frying. They become quite soft and the juice comes out of them. All right, now we'll lay in the onions, spread them out a little bit, and then take our meat and potato and beet mixture. And then we'll spread this over those onions. Now your meat is still raw, uncooked, and your potato, however, is a cooked potato. That's a beautiful red color. Now we'll put a last dollop of pepper. A little more salt. And then our cream and butter mix. We'll drop over this. People wonder what we do with this food after we cook it. Well, the camera crew all come in here and we all have a feast after we've done the show. Now, especially fun thing to do is to take eggs and just break these over the top. Space them as much as you want to. I've got 6 here, and this is about right for this number, because this amount would serve 3 people very generously. When you put this in the broiler, why, then the eggs will cook and the whole thing will heat up. And we'll stick that in now. You can do the same thing again with a frying pan and just let this thing get good and crisp. I've already turned the oven to 450, but so it's good and hot. But I'm going to turn it on to the broil. I'll let that simmer. Next dish we wanted to show you tonight was called fruit soup, and it's a Scandinavian dish. You'll find it typically Swedish, and it's just a whole mess of different kinds of dried fruits. And of course the Mormons brought dried fruits with them, and during the winter time they'd have fruits that they had picked from their own orchards as they developed orchards. And this is a very good dish, either hot or cold. And I've made a half recipe here. In the cookbook we show the full recipe, which is double this, but you use normally approximately a ½ pound of currants. This is a ¼ pound, about a little tightly in here would be a ½ cup of currants. And get a big boiler. This is the reason why we're making a half recipe tonight, because you really need a great big stock pot type of thing to make this. Put the currants in, and then take raisins. And a pound of raisins for a full recipe, a ½ pound here for half. And I've got a cup of frozen red raspberries. If you have the fresh, of course, that's even better. But the red raspberries give it a wonderful, wonderful flavor. And 2 sticks of cinnamon, and started out to be a box of prunes. Now half a box of prunes, or approximately ½ pound of prunes. And these give a good flavor to it. Then we took and peeled apples. And 6 apples are the normal recipe, and we will take here half of that and use 3. Cut these into slices. And this will keep, of course, in the refrigerator for a long time. Except that you'll eat it, and your kids will eat it. As a dish to serve either as a dessert or, as the Scandinavians do, as a beginning to a meal. It's a very refreshing one. Fruit soup. Okay, and let's see. Juice of a ½ lemon. And then you can add sugar to taste. And about a cup of sugar would be plenty for this half a recipe here. Put that in. And then to make it thicken, put in 2 tablespoons of tapioca. We're going to use this in another dish. The Mormons originally used sago, which was a starch produced by a West Indian palm called a sago palm. Now we'll just fill this up with water to the top of the fruit. And let it boil. And that's all there is to that. but it's a wonderful dish, and you can see the various colors. And that's fruit soup. Now, I mentioned the sago. The sago palm was the form of starch for making desserts back in the colonial days. And they used to get great big pieces of this sago, and they would dry it and then use it up as a dessert thickener. It's very similar to tapioca today. And one of the dishes that was very typical in the Mormon movement west and very high in vitamin C was rhubarb. And they used to have the roots of sago and rhubarb and make a pudding from it. And this is an extremely simple dish. You simply take 2 cups of chopped rhubarb and tapioca, which is your substitute for sago. Incidentally, George Washington had a sago palm tree, and this was burned in about 65, I think, during Lincoln's period, during a fire in the Washington area where they had an arboreum. Now let's take about 3 cups of water, and we'll put them, see, I'll put them into this kettle. And tapioca, 2 cups. We'll cook that until it begins to turn clear. This tapioca being the fine minute tapioca, it'll do it very quickly. Then simply all you do is add your rhubarb to it, and you can put in a little vanilla flavoring if you like. But the fresh rhubarb, of course, you would have to cook. But the frozen rhubarb you can use in here. Just put it into the water as it's cooking, and it will finish out. The frozen becomes more limp after it's thawed. And now this is even boiling. You need to stir this so that you don't have burning on the bottom. And we'll put in our rhubarb. And after this is cooked a little bit, why, just put it into little individual cups and bowls. Now we'll take a look at our eggs here. Oh boy, oh boy. Let's take a look at that. There we go. Well, with that, I say good night to you from Frying Pans West. Come back next week.
Years ago this very day we went to Governor's Isle for to stand for instant cannon in true military style. 17 American dollars each month we surely get for to carry a gun and vengeance with a military step. We had a choice of going to the army or to jail, for it's up the Hudson River with the copper take a sail. Oh, we puckered up our courage and with bravery we did go. Oh, because